Hello, nonprofit leaders. I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders, make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, nonprofit leaders. My guest for this episode is Dr. Eugene Manley Jr., a biomedical scientist turned social impact leader and founder and CEO of the STEM and Cancer Equity Foundation. He brings over 20 years of experience spanning engineering, molecular biology, nonprofit strategy, and workforce development. Through his foundation, he focuses on advancing STEM workforce diversity and improving patient-centered cancer care, especially for underserved communities. Dr. Manley also serves on several national advisory groups and has contributed to key work on compassion and stigma in lung cancer care, and his mix of research expertise, lived experience, and policy engagement fuels his practical approach to closing gaps in screening, biomarker testing, trial access, and survivorship. Welcome, Dr. Manley. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Before we dive into nonprofit leadership-y things, would you just share a little bit about yourself personally?
Yes. First, I want to thank you for having me on the show. I just think you're doing such great work and talking with great people about things that help other nonprofit leaders grow, scale, and get better at what they do. And I think your question was what inspired me to do the work.
Just have you heard it? Share something personally about yourself. That's what inspired you. I'll take it.
It's interesting. I grew up as a person with chronic asthma and allergies, and I was in the hospital 20 to 30 times a year with my asthma until I was about 10. And it just made me realize that, the need of medicine. And it also made me think about how the body worked and functioned and what happens when it doesn't work. And so it sort of put maybe a little thought in my head about maybe doing a career in healthcare. I didn't know that was what I was going to do. It just ended up being that way.
Yeah. Wow. What an intense journey. I mean, that's like more than twice a month in the hospital. And I'm sure you got to know how the hospital system.
Yes.
In that.
I saw a lot as a kid. I've seen a lot as what my family went through. And then I just saw a lot with my own experiences earlier this year.
Oh, interesting. Now, this is kind of going in a different direction, but over the years, like what has stood out to you, either as positive or things you're like, oh, this really needs fixing in the hospital system?
Well, since I've seen a lot of this, the biggest thing we really need is not just empathy, but compassion and being able to listen to people and what they say and not regard them as relevant or irrelevant based on their income or perceived insurance or perceived education levels. That would be the easiest answer to that question.
I see that as a woman, as someone who's recently had the experience of advocating for my aging parents in the medical system. Just really having to be like, hey, you might see an elderly person, but this is an active athlete, right? Not right. Where this isn't like a mope around, just move around the house. I shouldn't say mope around the house, but like this person's life is way more active than I can tell you're assuming. So let me draw you a picture to help overcome some of those biases that are kicking in for you. All right, so kind of bringing us into the space that we came here to talk about. So you've been an engineer, a cancer biologist, and you're now a nonprofit founder. How did you go from seeing gaps, and let's talk about what those gaps are in cancer equity, to actually launching a foundation to do something about it?
That's a very interesting question. As I grew up, I have ADHD, so I always saw gaps in everything. And I didn't know I had ADHD until I got to grad school, and I said, "Oh, it explains so much." Because I always questioned everything. I never fit in a box. And I said, "Well, this is the bigger issue." And everyone's like, "No, we have to do this." I said, "But that's not solving anything." But as I transitioned from the postdoc to nonprofit work, I worked at the AACR, the Lung Cancer Research Foundation, and Longevity. And in between those roles, patients, in particular, Black and Hispanic lung cancer patients, started reaching out to me to ask me to speak at events about disparities, about workforce representation, about clinical trials, about biomarkers. And, and I was like, okay, I can do this. And ironically, my PhD is in lung cancer. But when I did my PhD, we weren't thinking about disparities at the time. And so I said, okay, I can start speaking about this. But then what I learned is it became a great vehicle for getting information to people that don't routinely have it.
Mm.
And I've spoken with Carmano's Cancer Institute in Detroit at some of their community events. And it's just the way the people light up when they see me, because it's like, whoa, there's someone from Detroit that looks like us, and he can speak to us. And so they immediately will bring down the walls because they're so used to just being ignored and isolated. And so I just saw that there were gaps in how we educate underserved patients. And so I decided, what can we do to start to address it? And so part of that is our annual lung cancer conference that we do. And because I just saw what my mother dealt with navigating care, I said, we can't just rely on getting information in my chart. So we also started creating infographics to try to break down medical information and cancer information so that people can understand these things better.
Yeah. I imagine that, be, being someone who's been biased against, but then also being really well informed makes you an ideal person to be sharing this message and to just be like, hey, it's not for lack of education. It's what's happening. It makes me think of, I recently heard, I should know her name, but on another podcast, a Black female cardiologist talking about how she had terrible cardiology care and her risk for heart disease went, overlooked, passed off for years. And she is literally a cardiologist.
Yeah. Yes.
And it was really having to combine her training and realize just the gaps in her training that were like came from systemic biases and issues, not just like internal biases, but like as I recently learned, I've been diving into women's health issues that most medical studies are done exclusively on white men. And then we just extrapolate everything to everybody else because everyone else is exactly the same. And I'm being facetious, of course.
Yes.
So there, like that is to me like the definition of like a very clear systemic bias, right? It's just baked in that way. And so, so it affects the training and then it affects treatment and then combine that with everything else. It sounds like a real can of worms there.
Yes. So you have to make sure people can advocate or know how to advocate or have someone that can advocate for them. This is sometimes the only way to mitigate or stop it in its tracks. Because otherwise, it's going to keep happening, and people that don't really deserve to have things happen to them get things that shouldn't happen, and then you're stuck facing consequences later that are harder to repair.
Yeah, I'd love it. Can you share like an example of how you've, taken this inspiration, these ideas, and then started to turn that into an initiative that has measurable impact?
Well, this actually comes as a whole arc of my life. Growing up as first gen low income in inner city Detroit, hardly any of us got out of the neighborhood, and hardly any of us saw anyone that looked like us in STEM fields. But my science department had happened to know I had an aptitude for it, so she helped me get my first research job in high school at the Michigan Cancer Foundation, is what it was called at the time. But I just saw there's a lot of things we don't get exposed to when we're kids, especially from in the inner city. So you need to work to expose them to science early and probably by third grade so they can get that spark. Now, that doesn't mean you have to make them do science, but if you're going to catch them around third grade is an optimal time before they start getting into sports, video games, or other things. The other thing I saw as I navigated academia were a lot of, at least at the time, programs that wanted diverse scholars and wanted to talk about DEI and stuff. But then you would get there and then they still wouldn't help you get grants or funding. And then you're in a toxic place and then you're expected to adhere to whatever these standards are. But then they don't have any idea of your lived experience and all the external stuff you're dealing with and the structural systemic stuff that you still face, that you still have to keep in while you're inside a system. And then as I went through nonprofits, I just saw a lot of the underserved patients not being seen in materials and staff and board. So they never felt heard. And then they go to the meetups and they see people that don't look like them. But these patients get talked about how they got biomarker testing and trials and and the minority patients are like, what? This?
United.
And so the combination of those things sort of what led to Shet. And so one of the big things we do is the lung cancer health equity / intervention summit, which I had mentioned. And I really love this event because it was just a need. I just saw nothing for really Black and Hispanic patients in lung cancer. I said, what can we do to address the barriers? So I thought, and I'm a thinker, and I said, well, let's put together a program that brings together patients, researchers, clinicians, payers, hospital systems, etc., to not just talk about the problems these communities face, but what solutions are the different stakeholders creating at different levels that are actually reducing disparities, reducing inequities, and or improving outcomes.
Yeah.
And by having patients in the same space, or we try to use that to build our patient population, then they can learn more about their disease, learn better how to advocate, and then learn who at that meeting is either local or national that they can use, or maybe they can refer a friend to who's likely not who likely does not have a provider that can help them. So that's sort of the ideal of the summit. So I put together a great planning committee. We try to balance out the basic research, clinical research, community engagement, but we also make sure that even though it's heavy science, it's still understandable and relatable. And it's really hard to pull that off, but I really just love putting together that summit because it's just a lot of work, but it's just so impactful.
Yeah. So I have some questions around that because, I think what I'm hearing is a good example of how to take a complex problem, which usually the reality of a complex problem has very messy edges. You can't just put it in a box, but you kind of have to create an artificial box or just your energy is dispersed out into the whole world and every problem there ever was. So I'm hearing you put parameters around, you focus on lung cancer. I'm hearing you focus in on Black and Hispanic communities. And I'm hearing you have a focus on mixing the medical population with the patient the provider population with the patient population. Talk me through some of those decisions. How did you come to narrow down that focus?
What It was easy error in concept because Black and Hispanic patients were reaching out to me.
Okay.
They're
Yep.
reaching out to me.
Low
So
hanging fruit.
it says, so there's a need. And I said, okay, I can develop events and programs. And I had an extensive network because I had developed and oversaw health equity grants. I'd oversaw mentorship and training programs for diverse scholars. So I started leveraging that network and said, okay, who can either participate in this program or speak? And so I leveraged my network to find speakers. And what was unique and great about that is the requirement I have for my summit is that, we didn't say you had to all be Black and Hispanic. That I would never do, but what I wanted to make sure is that we had enough people that look like the communities we were serving. And we had people from tier one, tier two, tier three institutions. And we don't just go for the big names. I try to get a mixture because I want the people coming up in the research and clinical space to be seen, but also want the established people to be seen. And so I really make it a welcoming and inviting space intentionally. And this is the thing about my work, it's intentionality. You have to think about what are all of your barriers, and then you can funnel down, okay, what can I actually address?
Yeah. Yeah. Such an important lesson that I very much practice, preach of like just be intentional, right? The world is your oyster. You can make
Yes.
any decision, but make it with care because everything you choose to do means you're choosing not to do something else. It's not just am I going to do this or not? So I'm going to do this instead of that. So tell me, so another thing you did intentionally, I just want to shift gears for a second, is you founded as a fiscally sponsored program. I'm guessing that was a very intentional decision as well. Tell me a little bit about, how that worked for you, why you chose that direction.
Okay, this is what a lot of people launching nonprofits don't know. When you launch a nonprofit, you can be a 501c3 right out of the gate, or you can be a 501c3 fiscally sponsored. And what fiscal sponsorship is you work under the tax exempt number of another organization who has typically way more money than you. So you can use their tax exempt number when you submit your applications. But what that also offers you is the ability to fundraise right away because you're under their tax exempt number. So what that alleviates you from doing is having to do the compliance reporting, the annual budgeting. You still have to upload your numbers to them, but they do all their reporting. And so you aren't on the hook for that.
Yep.
And typically, as a 501c3, you typically need charity registration, I think, in 40 of the 50 states.
Any
If
of
my
them
memory is
that,
correct.
yeah, if you're planning to fundraise in them or accept money from them, you need the register.
And so I didn't, as a party of one, I didn't want to deal with that because that's another $6,000 to $10,000.
Yep.
And then filing all that and waiting and then while you're waiting, you can't fundraise. So I said, you go with fiscal sponsor to get that done. And then they help, you get some templates from them. And then you are more able to focus on the work you need to do. But it was a strategic decision. Also, when you're applying for funding, like if you're applying for smaller grants, 5 here, 10,000, you can have your separate receipt. But if you're trying to go for pharma and other bigger grants, I think there's a rule they may not be able to support more than 20 to 33% of your annual revenue. And so if you have a new nonprofit and you only have a revenue of 50,000, it would take them more paperwork and effort to try to fund 5K. And it's at that point not worth it
Right.
for them. So that's in essence kind of why I went with this. It allows us to get that aspect out of the way. We can do fundraising, we can write grants, and then we just work under the fiscal sponsors tax exempt number.
Yeah. And is it your intent to just stay fiscally sponsored indefinitely, or do you have a target for at what point you might become an independent?
That's a great question because a lot of it works on it. You can decide to stay fiscally sponsored or you can transition. I'm hoping maybe in about 3 years to be able to transition to independent 501c3. There are some pros of fiscal sponsorship, but then there's some drawbacks. And sometimes that drawback is you're working while you're under their taxes of number, then it gets tricky when you write grants in the org. So who's getting it? And then are there any subsidiaries? So you have to you have to be very cognizant of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. I want to talk about equity a little before we run out of time. You've become an expert in thinking about equity in cancer care. And I'd love to talk, through that lens, some stories you can share with us to help other leaders just flex their equity muscle a little better. What are those stones they should be unturning, questions they should be asking, practices they should be implementing?
If we're thinking of health equity, so one thing we want to define, I define health equity as one, intentionality. You have to be willing to address an issue or disparity that impacts one or more populations. If it helps everyone, it is not then equity. It doesn't mean it's not equality, but it's not equity. So you have to figure out which group are you trying to help, and then what is the barrier, and then what can you actually tackle that will make a difference.
Yeah.
And the second point is some orgs get caught in it. You have to do everything in health, which is impossible. There are so many things to fix. So if your version go for one issue, get good at that, so you can measure it, so you can scale it, then go to the next. And you don't have to do everything at once, because that is a key recipe for burnout. And the thing is, then just know who you're trying to target and benefit, and then keep them at the center of who's helping develop the program, design it, assess it, evaluate it. They have to be in there at all those stages.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm hearing like, while you might be aware of diversity, equity, inclusion, access, all the letters that you want to add in, and that it is a big, big problem that touches all sorts of things and has lots of problems in it, in the work of solving things, you got to get intentional, focused, pick an issue, pick a problem, pick something tangible, actionable, and take a chip out of the big block. If you think about the big block all the time, you're gonna be overwhelmed.
Yep. And then you can pick whatever issue it is, just pick something that maybe you're good at. Okay, I can fix this, or at least address it, and then go there. Don't go for the harder one, go for
an easy win. I love it. What's something that you've identified, just to make it concrete for people? What's an equity issue that you found? Like, let's go even specifically into lung cancer, if there is one.
So, well, there's plenty of issues in lung cancer. We talk in lung cancer a lot about clinical trials, and there's such a massive lack of diversity in lung cancer clinical trials. So the patients with the highest lung cancer rates are not represented in the trials. I always had been a proponent of, well, it's not so much the trial. I mean, it is in the trial team and the trial staff and the trial team diversity. That is an issue. But my bigger issue is we get so focused on the trials, like what is coming upstream? And so at a Disparities conference maybe 3 years ago, I just on a whim went by several posters, and they had one lung cancer cell line and they were using that was from a Black patient. And I just randomly asked the question, how many cell lines do we have from Black patients? Because typically cell lines are used to test and develop therapies that eventually become trials, that eventually become therapeutics. And with some people at USC and SAMU, we then went on a dive and dig through the literature to find all the cell lines in lung cancer. And we found about 800 published cell lines. About 390 were from Asian, 200 were from white individuals, 30 were from Black individuals, none were from Hispanic, Native American, Alaska Native, or other Pacific Islanders. And then of those 30 cell lines, only one cell line was from a Black individual. And so we have all these things out in non-small cell lung cancer, but if that's what we have as a starting cell line, that means every single target or therapy that is not really going to, per se, it may, but it's likely not going to have an impact in Black populations. So we argue in that paper that, you really have to look at the representation of the cell lines before you even know if this stuff is going to work. And the other thing we saw in that paper, which you talked about, women being in medicine and research, which is very true. We saw that there was about a 2.6 to 1 times greater increase or difference in male cell lines to female cell lines. But in the Asian subset, it was 7 to 1.
Wow.
So that is all. And that's what we have as far as literature about the cell lines. And the rest were either obtained so long ago we didn't have that genetic information. But the problem is, if that's your starting material, then there's nothing you really are going to do that will impact the communities that need it most.
Yeah, it's going to then just that systemic bias of bias selection is just going to I had to bring this to another realm. I enjoy helping people develop their processes and systems and automate things. And I'm always let's make sure the process works before we start automating. Otherwise, you're just scaling up your problem. Right? Like it's
Exactly.
kind of coming to mind here, right? Like if we don't get the base information right, then we just start scaling up off wrong base information, letting study after study, then we're just, amplifying the
Yep. And
original bias.
that's a universal problem. We have this great AI intervention, and then we didn't test it or validate it in groups that likely have this disease, and now
Yeah.
we don't have something that works. So
Yeah. So
this is
before we assume we can just generalize from a certain population, let's confirm that in fact, all the populations respond the same.
never great idea. We can make money on it.
Right. I mean, maybe there are a lot of white men, but that's probably not where we want to go.
No.
So, especially if we're nonprofits, right? That isn't our purpose. Our purpose is to shed light on these issues. Take a tangible bite out of one of those complex problems. I want to ask you, thinking about being a nonprofit leader and what you've learned, either for yourself or for the other nonprofit leaders out there, what's the one thing that you feel like if you get accomplished as a leader, that makes everything else that you need to do easier or unnecessary?
I think, as a nonprofit, the biggest thing is raising funds. And when you're starting from scratch, that is just hard to do. But that's more a thing you need to stay afloat. But the things that bring you, to make your day to day and, slogging through everything is when you can see that patient and they can come up to you and talk about how great they appreciate your work. Like, because it's been a really, really challenging year for me with the foot surgery and all the stuff I dealt with at the hospital. But one patient came up to me after my summit in tears saying, "Oh my God, thank you for putting on this conference. I've never seen this many Black people in the same space, but they were so smart, but they were also down to earth. And I felt seen and respected and acknowledged." And and I'm like, don't say that because I'm going to turn into a puddle of mud here. That's sort of why you do this kind of work. It's the people you're trying to help, not because I'm trying to do it for glory or fame. I mean, if I get glory and fame, okay, but that's not why you're doing the work.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is, if you have money to fuel it, and if you have a positive feedback loop where you get to emotionally feel the positive impact you're making, that's another kind of really important fuel that helps you keep going.
Yes, yes.
I love it. Before we wrap up, for those folks listening to this and being like, I'm loving this, I'm so maybe interested even in the summit, what kind of folks should be reaching out to you, and what's the best way to either reach out to you or learn more about your work?
All right, easiest way to find our work, the nonprofit is Selling Cancer Health Equity is SHEQ Foundation, or you can find us HTTPS SCHEQ.org. A lot of the stuff we do is there. We also have a lot of stuff on our LinkedIn and my LinkedIn page. So most of our social channels are STEMMCHEQ. It was what I could find
We'll have the links in the show notes too.
to keep it on a brand. But yeah, and then, we have also on the website, you can connect us, info@shen.org. We, besides the programs we do work with orgs to help them develop health equity strategies. We do speaking about clinical trials, workforce diversity, and we help develop events and programs. So that's sort of core things that we do.
I love it. So if any of you out there are listening and need help with those things, you have some resources to reach out to. And I'd love to ask if our audience can help you in some way. What's something that you're looking for? Take that next step forward.
Well, as a new nonprofit, we still are always in the look for volunteers, funders, partners. Yeah, we can use all the help. I know it sounds so general, but it is. You just you're as you have to try to grow and scale slowly, but there's so many things you need to do and you just don't have enough hours in the day.
Yeah, yeah, I totally understand. Well, my suggestion for you, my gift, anyone else out there listening, I would love to connect you with Armando Zumaya, who did a previous episode on building stronger futures and better fundraising for Latino nonprofits. And he runs a fantastic training for people in nonprofits to fundraise better. He runs like a world-class conference, and anybody who's targeting the Latino population as well as other populations are welcome to join his work. And it's a great way to learn some really top tier fundraising skills.
Oh, awesome. I'd be happy to. I'll make sure I'll get that info. I'll make sure to get that info.
After the show, I will make the connection for you. Thank you so much, Dr. Manley. Such a pleasure. And thank you out there for listening and everything you do to make our communities better, whether that's bringing access to care, working on that equity piece, or anything else you do. If you can do me a favor, as well as our larger community, rate this podcast, leave a review wherever you're listening to it, and share it with a friend or colleague who could benefit. Until next time, all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.